what is capable to gather a diversity into a unity. This will be also the definition of reason by Kant in the 18th century. That is a consideration, a pondering, a reflection. These three ways of being responsible, all thanks, I quote again Heidegger, all thanks to the pondering of the silversmiths for the that and the how of their coming into appearance and into play for the production of the sacrificial vessel, that is, this chalice. Heidegger then introduces his well-known thesis. Production, hervorbringen, brings out of concealment into unconcealment. Production appropriates within what we call revealing, in German, das Entbergen, aletheia. This is the moment in which Heidegger says techniques is producing the possibility of truth, aletheia in Greek. It's extremely important. He never condemned technology or techniques. He says we have to find aletheia in techniques or technology, in the Gestalt. I believe that so-called, in France, Heideggerian people never understood what is said here by Heidegger, because generally they claim that we must resist against technology. It's completely stupid. But this is, unfortunately, the mainstream interpretation of Heidegger. You know. Techne as this aletheia, that is a mode of truth as revealing, that is a mode of negandropy. This is what I say myself. It's not Heidegger who said that, of course, it's my own statement. The question that arises then is the following. What has the essence technology to do with revealing? The answer, Heidegger says, everything. For every production is grounded in revealing. Unquote. In my own vocabulary, I say techne is a pharmacon. In this ordeal of truth that is the post-truth era, the encounter with danger as such, which is to say with the Anthropocene, the name given by climatologists and geochemists of the biosphere to what Heidegger called Gestalt, a leap is required. A jump from the theory of four causes to the ordeal of quasi-causality. And for that we must think performativity in the sense of Lyotard, of Derrida, and before them of John Austin in all its forms. In fact, quasi-causality is not a theory. It is the experience of the ordeal of the necessary default. For example, that of the poet Jean Bousquet, wounded during the First World War, confined to his bed forever after that, but performatively turning his wound into poetry, on which Gilles Deleuze comments in the following terms as a way of introducing the logic of the Stoics. Where do doctrines come from, if not from wounds and vital aphorisms? He asks. Jean Bousquet must be called Stoic. He apprehends the wound that he bears within, he bears deep within his body in its eternal truth as a pure event. This is an excerpt of the Logic of Sense. To the extent that events are actualized in us, they wait for us and invite us in. They signal us. And here he quotes Bousquet, who says, "My wound existed before me. I was born to embody it." Unquote. It is, now Deleuze speaks, it is a question of attaining this will that the event creates in us, of becoming the quasi-cause of what is produced within us, the operator, Deleuze says. If not, the silversmith, I add. This question today is for us, the collective operator we should become with Greta Thunberg in order to change the Anthropocene into the neg-Anthropocene. It's almost a completely impossible task. If you take into account, for example, the tension in between Taiwan and China, and mainland China, Hong Kong, the tension in between Asia and America through Trump, the destruction of Europe by fascism, because now Europe is becoming fascist, anew. And it will happen everywhere, even in France. In 2 years, you will be fascism at the head of the state. Is it possible to produce such a quasi-causality in order to transform Anthropocene into neg-Anthropocene? The answer is very clear. Absolutely yes, because it's the only way possible. It's absolutely improbable, but it is the unique, necessary task we have to take into account. So it is the role of the universities, of the art schools. It's our role. If we are academics, we want to participate to such an incredible challenge. The most incredible challenge from the beginning of the biosphere. The operator is the one who welcomes the event being the Anthropocene for us, and is welcomed by it, the one who realizes it. It means that the Anthropocene is not realized. It is real, but not realized. That is, it is a fact, but it's not right. We have to produce the rightness of the Anthropocene as neg-Anthropocene. And this is what Whitehead called the functional reason. To correct becoming in order to transform it into future. Of course, all of this directly and immediately concerns art and artists, particularly in this event that is the Anthropocene, or what Heidegger calls Gestell, and as that which awaits an Ereignis, that is, it awaits an event that would also be a performance, in the sense in which an artist is a performer. A question appears here: what differentiates the craftsman from the artist? I address the question of the artist because it is the stake of the question concerning technology for Heidegger. What differentiates, for example, the silversmith from the sculptor? To answer this question, let's see, this is the work of a craftsman, and this is something that we could call a sculpture. Is it a sculpture? Not at all. It's an object from everyday life, but it is in a museum and it is considered to be an artwork. Aftermath. So the question is, what is art really? What is craftsman really? It's extremely difficult to answer such a question. Maybe it's not a good question. We'll see that later. To answer this question, then, we must first identify what it is they have in common. And for that, we first must go deeper in the question of the four causes, to reinterpret all versions of this theory over the course of the history of being. All those Roman and then Christian transformations of Aristotle's physics, as well as its eventual abandonment by modern physics and techniques, as so many effects generated by the denial of the quasi-causal situation to which the exosomatic condition of poiesis amounts through and through, and where poiesis would then no longer be endosomatic physis that opens itself up by itself, and would instead become noetic techne in such a way that aletheia constitutes and establishes the precarious age of truth as what Heidegger called Geschichte, history, which is always artificially produced via techniques. Facticity, constitutive of mortals as this is staged in the myth of Prometheus and Epimetheus, here assigns to these mortals, by way of Hermes, that is through decay and eidos, justice and shame, the obligation to make their default come true, to make it truly happen, to make it advene in truth. This happening, we could call that in theater a performance. This advent, this Ereignis, we could say with Heidegger or in German, all this is time as the aletheia of an incessant and irreducible exosomatization that, in Gestell, presents itself as such. But here, however, as such means as the absence of epoch, as the post-truth era, as a presence of nothingness, as the ordeal of what remains hidden, of what does nothing but conceal, that this being the crisis of art today. Because we are in a big crisis. You can see that at the Pompidou Center very well. What remains is to interpret this, or in other words, to undergo the ordeal, and to do so by default, to be in default, which means much more radically to advene by default. And this requires us to turn back to the history of modern physics and of what, with Newton, Isaac Newton, you can read here the Principia Mathematica by Newton, annotated by Leibniz. With Newton modern physics eliminates finality, and along with it, locality. Topoi, in the sense of Aristotle, cosmology, in the sense of Yuk Hui, thereby becoming astrophysics. With Carnot, Clausius, Boltzmann introduces the non-finality of entropy. It is something completely different from Newton. With Schrödinger, oh no, sorry, I forgot an image, and after Bergson, thinks life as the struggle against entropy. That is, as a local difference with the A of the end, both Cora and Lichtung. And with Wiener, becomes that which effectively concretizes modern physics, that is, metaphysics become mathesis universalis, in the sense of Leibniz as characteristica universalis in the Gestell of planetary reticulation via the optoelectronic networks of cybernetics that are lightning fast, or in fact twice as fast as lightning, twice as fast as just lightnings. Such an analysis of modern physics and what it engenders as modern technology presupposes, however, a completely new interpretation of Heidegger's analysis. But to all these references, we must also add the analysis outlined by Alfred Lotka in 1945 with his theory of exosomatic evolution, where this is pursued completely otherwise than the endosomatic evolution, through which physis is poiesis as opening by itself. From Lodkar's exosomatic point of view, which I consider together with the work of Whitehead and Canguilhem, noetic poiesis is growth and openness as the experience of truth qua function of reason, like you can study in this book. I recommend you to read this one. It's a very good introduction into Whitehead. In the irreducibly pharmacological form of life, that is the destiny of mortals in the sense of the Greeks, and where the ordeal of truth is therefore vital. This is what was said by Nietzsche already. We must then reread all of Heidegger with Marx too. It was Marx who, firstly in the economic and philosophical manuscripts, then with Engels in the German ideology, first formulated the question of concerning exosomatization, which Marx called production. This is the manuscript, not the manuscript, the fragments of German ideology. In the Grundrisse by Marx, the production in industrial capitalism becomes automatic, as it comes to engender a concretization of science as the apparatus of production that is called by Marx in this book fixed capital. This is what we are living with the exospheric infrastructure around the Earth, wherein the ordeal of truth would be disintegrated by calculation, insofar as the latter is based on generalized proletarianization, that is destruction of knowledge of the workers, who are not workers but proletarians. Not only the manual workers, but also the physicists today. The astrophysicists, for example, the doctors, the lawyers are proletarianized by what? By big data and deep learning. From the machine that enslaves the worker, who thus becomes proletarian, to the scientist himself excluded from algorithmic black box processes. To undergo the ordeal of truth at present is to rethink Gestell and Leibniz after a reconsideration of the theory of negative entropy and anti-entropy as applied to the production of physics. And it is to do so by adding to it the theory of entropy with A and H and negentropy with N and H from the neganthropology, such that it is no longer by starting from the endosomatic organogenesis of a local organic difference with A that we must think the struggle against entropy and Gestalt, but rather by starting from an exosomatic organogenesis that is necessarily pharmacological, which is to say that it always produces both entropy and negentropy. The truth then becomes that of economy, inasmuch as it enables an opening up to the improbability of what, as the ordeal of truth, becomes the anti-entropic quasi-cause of entropy. In other words, it becomes a question of knowing how an instrument can be not a means, but which instructs, that is, teaches true production, that is, instructs production in a negentropic way, as exosomatic difference with A. To do so, we must make a leap beyond the theory of four causes and the privilege it establishes for efficiency, so that we can give back to finality its priority, but as quasi-causality. That is, as what poetically, from poiesis, and therefore incalculably remains irreducible to calculation, while requiring it and as efficiency by precisely turning it into the quasi-cause, that is, the endless end in the incessant, as Maurice Blanchot says. It thus becomes possible to reconsider the operator of Deleuze, but also of Heidegger and the silversmith, the artisan, the craftsman, and the artist, and with Nietzsche, as the one who can engender improbable bifurcations in a super-saturated entropic system. I use here the vocabulary super-saturated of Gilbert Simondon. All this amounts to a program of generalized deproletarianization. It is not some simple assigning of culture or art to some or other vague responsibility. It is a re-elaboration of a critique of political economy, where this involves totally rethinking what this has to do with work, that is production, what this has to do with relationships between automatisms and disautomatization, and what differentiates value from wealth. In the book you have, there is an explanation on this question, in the third chapter, and how it will thus become possible to develop an economy of negantropy, so that the neganthropocene can happen, so that we can make it advene, so we can try to answer Greta Thunberg. Such are today the stakes of art as a social sculpture, but art here is also philosophy. If we agree with Nietzsche for saying that today philosophy and art are the same question, and from the point of view of exosomatization. To finish and conclude, if you are not too tired, I would like to add that during our symposium around Black Mountain College, I gave a seminar in Switzerland about these questions. I tried to show that first, the cultural industries and after them social networks have taken hold of everyday life. Destroying its everydayness, where we understand the latter in the sense both of Heidegger and Henri Lefebvre. To sculpt the social is to sculpt space with time and time with space. Such a social sculpture sculpts psychic retentions and pretensions in order to produce collective retentions and pretensions. Retentions and pretensions being concept that I have bought from Husserl, explained in this book. No, I don't have the book, sorry. I also pointed out, I also pointed out that at the very moment when I'm speaking to you, when you are listening to me, you are retaining what I am saying in that moment so as to aggregate it to what I will say immediately afterwards. This aggregation constituting what Husserl called primary retention. You carry out this primary retention of what I say on the basis of your secondary retentions, that is, in terms of what you have retained from your past experience, even ever since you were born. These secondary retentions serving as a criteria by which you select your primary retentions, which are therefore primary selections. It is for this reason that each of you understands something different in what I say, because each of you has different selection criteria. Thanks to what I call tertiary retention, which retentions retained in and by space, and which are always more or less culture or visual arts, that is spatialized time, and all works of art as such tertiary retentions. But so too are ordinary objects, which may sometimes seem to be work of art themselves, along with everything that surrounds us, houses, the street, everything that constitutes what the Greeks called the oikumene and Heidegger called dwelling. Thanks to these tertiary tensions, then, we can make the diversity of our various understandings converge by projecting them to infinity via convergent pretensions, which amount to what we call the ends of humanity. But we can also make them converge by finitizing them, that is, by turning them into something calculable, by exhausting them, by exhausting those singularities that alone are what make us capable of jointly producing projections to the infinite. This joint production being social sculpture, which is an economy formed through the process of what Gilbert Simon called collective individuation. When calculations are imposed on retentions and pretensions according to the criteria used by algorithms, which replace those singularities that are psychic individuals, the ends of man end up converging towards the end of humanity as the big shift of the Anthropocene era. This is what occurs when the industries of memory and imagination become completely based on calculating machines, on computers. This is so because calculation produces closed systems. That is, I forgot something, I'm sorry. Entropic systems, and hence entropic systems with an A and with an E. Conversely, infinite projections are infinite opportunities for bifurcation. Infinite means incalculable. Incalculable means both improbable and interminable in Maurice Blanchot's sense. We will never be finished with what is constituted as a work, thanks precisely to this fact, insofar as it always remains open. This is a work. You cannot say, for example, I read Balzac, or I heard Mozart, and now it's finished. I consumed it. No, you cannot consume it. If you consume it, you missed it. It is sculpted in and by space via tertiary retention is therefore what is sculpted in and by space via tertiary retention is therefore time. We do not have such time left to resculpt the Anthropocene or to let our infinite pretensions of the neg-Anthropocene emerge, that is to produce a neganthropic knowledge. We do not have much time. Such sculpture is the infinite task of artists, thinkers, and citizens, insofar as they remain citizens, even as managers and entrepreneurs. That is, singularities bearing a future. This task amounts to the invention of a new political economy that must also be a new economy of desire in Freud's sense, when he refers to libidinal economy. The infinite object is the object of desire, that is, in the sense of Plato's Symposium. This demands that we rethink the relationship between the craftsman, the artist, and the social from the perspective of the work, insofar as the work is what belongs in a variety of ways to the artist, the artisan, and the citizen, that is, to the inhabitant of the city. This task requires, on the one hand, okay, I understand that I didn't have the last version. This is don't worry. It is the reason for which I said there is a problem, but it's okay. It's okay. Thank you very much. This task requires, on the one hand, sizing out the tertiary retentions of our time, for example, as the time of smart cities, and turning these tertiary retentions into instruments of social sculpture. And on the other hand, sizing all the concepts in the sense of Rax Media, a group from New Delhi, as a claim, such as those I have proposed to you, which are also themselves instruments. It is with them that I have tried to sculpt the social. With you, yourself, sculpting into what I said, this social being you, insofar as you are temporal. Now, let's address a short question for really finishing and leaving the ground for my friend Yuk Hui. I would like to go back to the question of the operator. isn't it a collective one if it is true that the psychic individuation, that is the operator, is always already collective? In such a case, we should say that the individuation of the collective operator is the second time of what I call the doubly epochal redoubling. That is the process by which an evolution in a stage of exosomatization creates a shock in a society